Greetings, brothers and sisters. One of my viewers sent me this. Nancy Pelosi. This is mostly going to be about Russia and the Ukraine. I talked about this a little bit in a video yesterday and a couple days ago, maybe 2 days ago. And there was this interesting, I don't know, interesting, but very telling CNN report I caught last night about it. And so I want to get into that in just a moment, but this is too hilarious to pass up on.
When people ask me what are the three most important issues facing the Congress.
Who asked you that, Nancy? Who asked that, Nancy Fire Marshal Shill? Do people come up and say, hey, Nancy, what are the three most important things facing the Congress? Not two, not four, not one. What's facing the Congress? Three. I want three answers. I want the three most important things. Whoever asked you that? Did anybody ask you, hey, Nancy Pelosi, what are the three most important things? Let's listen to that again. That's great.
What are the three most important issues facing the Congress? I always say the same thing. Our children, our children, our children.
Children. It's the children. She looks like she's about... she's all about the children.
Consciousness of purity. And children have that. I see God in the face of children. And, I just love being around that all the time.
When I heard Nancy say that, I was like, oh. I remember there was another ghoulish person whose face was all effed up like Fire Marshal Shill. And I was like, hey, let me go find that.
Same thing. Our children, our children, our children. That is my why I am in Congress, for the children.
She wants the children. She sounds like the Wicked Witch of Hansel and Gretel. I do it for the children.
Before I would hurt a child, I would slit my wrists. I would never hurt a child. These are totally false. I was outraged. I could never do something like that.
This is my story, and this is my song. As you hear me say, when you're in the arena, you have to be able to take a punch or throw a punch for the children.
Fire Marshal Shill is great. She's running again. She's not giving up. Here she is with the Full House, San Francisco Full House background behind her. She's doing it for the children. She just loves those children, right? And that's Fire Marshal Shill. One of my viewers sent me this. Ex-bank CEO spent $220,000 at strip club was a business expense. That didn't make sense, but I guess I read that wrong. This guy's a Swiss banking CEO, and he went to a strip club, and he spent $220,000. That's like Hunter Biden rates right there. So, that's what these guys do. Why Germany might be the West weak link in Russia standoff, Russia-Ukraine standoff. So I'll get into this CNN thing that says, among other things, that the Ukrainians aren't into it, they don't think it's as bad as the U.S. is making it, which seems, kind of effed up. But let's see what they say here.
U.S. and its European allies are bracing for a possible Russian military assault. The latest American shipment arriving in Ukraine with anti-tank Javelin missiles, launchers, and other weapons to help fend off an invasion. With 8,500 U.S. troops now in a heightened state of alert, President Biden says he could start repositioning them to Eastern Europe before any Russian advance.
So there are, ways that politicians try to save a presidency by faking a war, right? By creating a war or to give a threat of war or whatever it is, right? War is something that heals all wounds and takes away from failed political policies and other things. So that could be this thing. But there has been this beating of the drum, especially from the Democrats, about Russia, going back to the Obama administration, right? Of course, Biden was a part of that. And then with Hillary and Russia, and the Russia hacks and all these things, Russia has grown back into America's primary enemy. And, the Ukraine used to be part of Russia. And then there's all these other countries here that are allies of America, and America has missiles and things, all this stuff over here. And so strategically, and, Russia for its own personal safety, there is, emphasis, and there's like natural resources here in the Ukraine and other things. And so this is, heading towards World War III.
What would lead to that is what's going to happen, what Putin does or doesn't do. And I may be moving some of those troops in the nearer term just because it takes time.
The president says he does not intend to send any of those troops into Ukraine, and the Pentagon is leaving the door open to more deployments to Europe.
I certainly would not rule out the possibility.
Americans don't want a war, right? Like right now. Let's go to the CNN piece. I saw this last night. I saw part of it, and it was very interesting in the sense that the Ukrainians aren't into it, and it seems like America's pushing for this thing, based in this shill you see, this military guy. And so let's start here.
Written responses to come in. But yes, the Kremlin spokesman today said that possible deployment would be a cause for concern. He also said a cause for concern is what he described as a Ukrainian military buildup of troops and military hardware close to the front line with the pro-Russian separatists in the east of Ukraine, in the Donbass region.
See, when there's a war, usually one side wants it, one country wants it, or whatever it is. If it's an alliance, one country or one group of countries want the war, and the other group doesn't, right? It's like any sort of a mismatched fight. When one side has military superiority, when one side is so much, it's like a pro football team playing a high school football team. Like there's just no chance. And you saw that with America's Arab Spring and, the wars in Libya and the wars in, certainly in Iraq and kind of in Afghanistan, that when there's military superiority, then it's not really a war, it's an invasion, right? And so with the Ukraine, Russia has military superiority, right? So if Russia's saying the Ukraine is threatening them by going after some of their pro-Russian rebels, that's an excuse they always use. They use this, in Israel, and America uses it all the time. And England, did it as well. That there's some sort of a threat, and, but there's one, power. There's one army that has more power. But then if you look at the bigger picture, America and these European, allies have military superiority against Russia. And so if it was just Russia and the Ukraine, that's one thing. But if it's, America and their allies are pushing for this, then it's another, right? And so, it's all liars, and it's all power-hungry sociopaths, psychopaths. And so antisocial personality disorder, I think it's what it's called now. It doesn't matter, right? It's people or rulers that are hungry for power-hungry rulers, and they're pushing. It seems like America's pushing for a war with Russia. Ever since Russia war-blocked America in Syria. Remember when Russia stood up to Obama in Syria? Ever since then, America has been really pushing for problems with Russia.
All right, Mick Robertson in Moscow, Matthew Chance in Kiev. Thanks to both of you. Appreciate it. Joining us live to discuss, retired Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Finman, former European Affairs Director for the National Security Council during the Trump administration. I want to start, Lieutenant Colonel, with the report we just heard from Matthew Chance that the Ukrainians are not happy with White House comments that an invasion to them seems imminent. What's your reaction? What goes through your head when you hear that reporting?
So this is a big concern, because if the people you're trying to save are saying, hey, take it easy, right? We don't need rescuing. I think you're overblowing this, right? The Ukrainians are saying that they don't think the Russians are about to invade. It's not imminent. And Biden, and, there's been all these reports, and this is what I saw yesterday. Gets a little bit weird with Jake Tapper, which is always funny. But this guy is really hitting the panic button here.
Well, there's I could understand from the Ukrainian perspective why they might want to downplay it. Part of it is this idea that if they do in fact start to build up forces too early, that could precipitate the Russian aggression in their mind. They also want to keep their population calm. But to me, the most important thing, it's not the words and the rhetoric, certainly coming from the Russian side, but it's the deeds. They've built up a massive force.
It's the deeds, right? See, the Ukrainians obviously don't want war and don't want to be used as a pawn here. And again, I can't speak for the Russians. I don't really watch much Russian stuff. Like, I don't, know what's going on in terms of politics in Russia. I do know that the people I know from the Heartfulness system, from spending time in the ashram, there was all these nice Ukrainian and Russian people, and you couldn't tell the difference. They always hung out together, and they were sweet people. Like, there was no, I don't remember meeting one Russian person who, again, these are people who are doing heartfulness meditation, so it's, I don't think it's necessarily a reflection of their whole population, but they were very sweet people, very, not aggressive, or they weren't like anti-American in any way. I had good interactions with them, and I'm talking about there's probably maybe 100 different Russian people over there, and a few that have lived in America that I've known, and they're just nice people, like just sweet people specifically, right? Some of the other countries, not the same, a lot more drama. Some of the European countries, there's a lot of drama, just not likable people in the heartfulness system. But all the Russians were great, very, happy to be in India because it's warm and, it's not that much, probably in some ways a better lifestyle. And so, the people themselves, they don't want this, right? They live with enough hardship, and they know what war is, what it's like to be invaded. Like, we don't know as Americans. We haven't been occupied, and that's going to happen. Maybe in our lifetime, there'll be a time where America isn't America anymore in terms of the most powerful country, and we'll be occupied, and we'll be, and it'll suck, and we'll be like, oh, this sucks, right? Because it always comes back around. Every country that was once the most powerful country at some point loses their power, and they become somebody's bitch, right? Like, and that's, and it sucks. Like, it's just, it's not a good thing. It's not a positive thing. And, America's done so many wrong things and been a bully. America's, the evil empire right now, and that's not going to last forever. It looks like it's winding down pretty quickly. And, just the cluelessness of the American leadership who are, willfully just destroying America in every possible way. And another war at this time is a big part of that, right?
They've basically closed off all the possibilities of reaching a diplomatic settlement on this by staking out such a hard position on what they want. They want a ironclad guarantee that Ukraine would not end up in NATO. They want to redesign the European security architecture. And between leaving no door for diplomacy and this massive military buildup, unprecedented, it seems to me clear that the Russians are on the cusp of taking action. I think it's going to be in middle of February. It's something that I've been watching, since October, November, and this I think it's bearing out in fact now.
So I have this picture. This is from years ago, years and years ago, when I was doing more picture-based videos, and this is like sort of a meme. The U.S. has 40 bases surrounding Iran. Should they feel threatened, you can see all these countries around Iran have some sort of military base, right? And, of course, Israel's right there as well, which is probably more militarily superior than Iran. And then it says, what if Iran had as many bases around the U.S., would you feel threatened? And this is one of the problems with America. The way that America is always pretending to be the good guy and always being the victim, right? Being threatened. Iran wants no part of war with America, right? Iran would be crushed by a war with America. America might not do that well, and Russia might get involved, or China, whatever happened, right? But, Iran would certainly no longer exist, and their leadership would be destroyed. And, it would fare really poorly. No matter what happened to America, Iran would go down. And so America is always acting like the hero and also the victim, right? These countries are always trying to go to war and fight America, and they want no part of war with America because we spend 60% of our budget, and we're the wealthiest country, on weapons and military-industrial complex and war. And so no one wants any part of that. We have the most superior military force out there. So this is NATO versus Russia, and really NATO is America. Just like with the Iraq War, these European countries will put up some level of, support, but it's not, it's going to be like 90% America, right? So this is America against Russia, and you can see here from these images, this represents, these little things here, represents military bases, U.S. bases, and there's more U.S. bases here than there are Russian bases around this area, right? And so the Ukraine is very strategic. If they join NATO and America gets to put a base here and possibly, nuclear missiles or something, which would be a complete bummer for Russia, right? Just like when Russia tried to put nuclear missiles in Cuba and America had that whole standoff with Kennedy. But you see here, America is, and you look at all these countries, they're right here with Russia, right? And so Moscow is not that far from the Ukraine, and this is for a possible invasion. America is well situated, and if they get the Ukraine, if they're able to put a military base like right here, then that would be a bummer for the Russians. And that's, this is what's at stake here, and something that could easily be a reason for war, and, would be World War III.
If you were advising President Biden today, what's the next move you would recommend?
I think in terms of deterrence, we have probably little that we can do at this point. I think the things that are starting to come to bear, some coherence around sanctions, the forces that are being signaled that will go into Eastern Europe, the military equipment going into Ukraine, those will start to affect the Russian calculus, in some ways complicating it and maybe even locking in action now as opposed to in the future, right? We have thousands of surface-to-air and anti-tank capability missiles going into Ukraine. It's just going to get harder as Ukraine integrates them. But it's all based off of this assessment that a offensive is all but certain to happen, and this is not what precipitates it. This is what could deter it.
All empires fall, right? Whenever you use force, I've talked about this with heartfulness meditation, but just, it's also physics, right? It's scientific as well. That whenever there's a force, whenever you apply force, there is always a counter force that meets the force, right? So when there's force, then a counter force, like a rebound, is going to happen, right? And America has been very forceful. Our country has forced and imposed its will all around the globe in various ways. And Russia and China are at some point, this has been prophesized, are going to come together and create a counterforce to that, right? And it's inevitable. Like whenever there's a villain, there's a hero. Whenever there's a hero, there's a villain, right? There's always these, and it might not even be that black and white, like there's, two opposing forces. Both of them are deeply flawed, right? They're not heroes, but they're not totally villains either, right? And so they're just two opposing forces. And you see it happen time and time again. There's these sports dynasties, and they don't last, right? They fall apart for lots of reasons. And part of it is that everyone goes after them, right? If you want to be the man, you got to beat the man. And so when you are, it happens in nature, right? With the lion, and there's always these young lions coming up. And eventually young lions are going to kill the old lions, right? Male lions, because they're going to take over the, head of the pride. And that happens throughout nature, right? All these, territorial battles, and usually there'll be a big male like a bull or whatever it is, right? And you can see the pecking order, like just with our farm, the chickens, there's a distinct pecking order. And with the cows and all other animals that we've had, all livestock, there's going to be the dominant, animal, whether it's, even if you just have females, there's going to be, the dominant cow. And that cow just goes, eats wherever it wants. It just pushes out, if there's food, you throw food out there, and that cow will just push away all the other cows. We have 2 roosters now, right? And they, get along pretty well. The size difference, the one that you hear is I don't know exactly the name, Egyptian. It's some sort of small Egyptian. It's almost like a wild bird. And, my wife bought they were both originally supposed to be females, but the chicks that they sent sometimes end up being male, right? And the other one is an Australorp, which is a beautiful big black bird. It was it has like some green iridescence on it. It's neat looking. It's one of my favorite chickens because one of the first chickens my family had years and years ago. And he's pretty mild, and he's like 4 times the other rooster's size. But we had other roosters before. They were just battling it out. They were fighting all the time, right? And, eventually there's some, one becomes dominant. And, that happens in nature and now, here. And I think this is what you're looking at. It might not be this war. It might not be this. But, it's coming. America is losing its power, its economic power, the people, the divisions, the hatred between the various groups. And, it's just America sort of has run its course as an empire. And these things are, all these little, it's like death by 1,000 cuts, eventually will cost America its, supremacy, its dominance.
So I think the things to do now to prepare for the day after, to posture the United States to secure U.S. national security interests, to secure NATO, and be prepared to act when Russia conducts its offensive.
President Biden was asked today about the possibility of sending U.S. service members not just into Eastern Europe, Eastern European nations that are NATO allies, but into Ukraine directly, even though Ukraine is not a NATO member state. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We have no intention of putting American forces or NATO forces in Ukraine. But as I said, there are going to be serious economic consequences if he moves.
What's your reaction to that? Do you think there's anything that Putin could do that would cause the U.S. to send service members directly into Ukraine?
I think that's quite a realistic possibility. Although I think every intention is to keep U.S. forces out. The nature of this offensive that's about to take place, it will be the largest offensive in Europe since World War II. It's going to implicate Eastern European security. Eastern European allies of ours within NATO, the Baltic states, Poland, Romania are likely to provide support. If the Russians just decide to go for even beyond the kind of scary scenario that I've laid out, a all-out offensive from the northeast.
A scary scenario, right? Like, the arrogance here is that we had the Arab Spring where America went into Afghanistan, which is, it's nothing close to us, right? It isn't Canada. It's not Mexico. It's not something that borders our country. It's not even Europe, right? It's, it's almost halfway around the world, and America went into Afghanistan, and then Iran had a military action in Libya, of course, and then tried to invade, not Iran, Iraq, and the military action in Libya, and then tried to invade Syria, and had a little thing in Egypt as well, right? And so, and Wesley Clark came out when these neocons who were Republicans, remember I showed you that video numerous times where he went in and met with Wesley Clark, was the former head of the military, whatever it was, right, under Clinton, and he went in, and the Bush administration was trying to invade 7 countries in 5 years, and they were going to end up in Iran was the last, right? And, it's across the globe. This is, invasions and basically neo-colonialism of these countries that have resources in Africa, all these types of natural resources. And the Russians here are, trying to secure their border. It's a completely different thing, right? This guy's calling it scary. And, the Russians finally stood up to America in Syria after America invaded 4 different countries, changed leadership in 4 countries, overturned regimes in 4 countries.
And south and seized large portions of Ukrainian territory for some amount of time. I think there's a chance that the U.S. could ultimately get drawn in. That's why I've been urging this administration to take action early to deter Russian aggression. I think we're likely beyond that point. We are now facing a geopolitical inflection point. One of those relatively rare occurrences that will drive geopolitics in the coming years, maybe decade. And we need to be prepared to signal that this is not going to be tolerated. Russia is the largest military power in Europe, but in the big scheme of things, it's really quite small in terms of economic power. And we need to leverage all our tools to limit the fallout from these events that are about to unfold and ensure that the Western democratic order continues to persevere when this is going to be a fairly significant impact on the Western liberal order with an attack on a democracy, Ukrainian democracy.
So the part's coming up here. I'm going to wait for that to talk about, Americans, there's just no way we can go to war right now, right? And so it's coming up here. Let me, let's listen to what he has to say about this. But, everybody kind of knows this, right?
Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, what would you say to somebody who's watching at home who says, look, I get that your family is from Ukraine originally. You feel very passionately about protecting that democracy. But on the other hand, you served in Iraq and you still have shrapnel in your body from that war. And I'm speaking now for this hypothetical viewer, and I don't feel comfortable with one American service member getting injured or killed fighting this war. What would you say to them? What are your thoughts on that?
So the guy's going to get weird here with Jake Tappas, over Trump and Trump investigation. So, let's listen to that, and then I'll come back to this question because it is, the only truth that matters here, right? That Americans aren't into fighting a war right now for so many reasons.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to just knock down this idea of dual alliances. It's something that the far right has attempted to attack me with to undermine my credibility during the first impeachment trial of Donald Trump. My concerns have always been for U.S.
No. I'm not impugning. I don't mean to impugn your. I just mean like, why? Just the large. I apologize if you thought that I was suggesting that. Just a reminder, I'm Jake, not Chuck.
I'm talking to about Jake. I understand where you're going. I'm just talking about the hypothetical viewer that I understand. You're definitely not implying that. But that my concerns have always been U.S. National security interests above all else. I spent 21 and a half years in military service.
See, what he's saying there, what is, if you read between the lines here, America does not have the will for war. Not after all those BS wars, what happened in Afghanistan, at the end of Afghanistan. And the far right, having been trumped and having been, divided in its own way, is no longer, the neocons and all those guys are gone. And, they might exist, but they're no longer in power. And those are the guys, the Republicans are the people that fight the wars, right? I mean, it's poor people and Republicans who go into the military, and it's Republicans who have pushed for the military and wars in the past. But recently, with Obama and now Biden and Clinton when she ran, they were very pro-war in a way that doesn't make any sense because they're boomer hippies. Even pre-boomer hippies, like they were the generation before. And the Democrats were supposed to be, like your mom. Is that the rooster? You guys see the rooster's right behind me again. That's our Egyptian rooster. And our eggs, we're getting like crazy amount of eggs. Like we didn't get any eggs in like November. We were like no eggs, and we got like 14 eggs yesterday. It's so cold out, so whatever. And so there he goes again. I don't know if you heard that. But the right wing has always been the sort of pro-war people, but the right wing are very anti-government right now. Many of them. And then the extreme left wing is as well because of the whole thing with COVID. And the divisiveness in our country, it's hard to fight a war when you're going through a divorce. Like America's like going through a divorce right now. And, a war and divorce are very similar, right? It's the same sort of thing. There's like a civil war. And just, the way that COVID's hit everybody and the supply chain issues, and many people can't get enough employees for, their businesses. I mean, this is the services sucking, and you see that for whatever reason, whatever's going on with all these things, and, this younger generation, they're not really into it, right? They're not pro-military. I mean, it's just not very patriotic, and they're not very physical. They're used to playing video games. If it was a robot war and it was drones, yeah, maybe. But they're not, suited for this. There would almost have to be a draft if we had war with Russia, if this ended up being World War III. And America just isn't into it, right? This is what happens to empires. Eventually, they just lose the taste for war. It happened in Europe and, all these countries. They lose their hunger because of just the comfort and the lifestyle and all these things. And Russia knows this, right? Everybody knows this. And America's solution when there's economic collapse, which happened in 2019, this happened in 2001, 2008. War is good for that. Like war, helps solve the economic issues with, any sort of American problem. That's the solution has always been war, and it's not now, right? And war with Russia would be disastrous. So, I don't know what the Russians are feeling about war as a country, but I know they know America doesn't want it. And it would be a very when you don't have support of the people, your citizenry, your citizens, if you don't have support of your citizens, then you can't fight a war. And there's just no support for this, right? There would have to be something horrific that happened to America where Americans would come together to fight Russians and maybe China. I mean, who knows how this would play out? And then there would be the economic impact where Americans would be, maybe rioting or at least protesting those changes in their lifestyle, which is coming because of inflation, at the same time fighting a war with Russia. Like, what are you, crazy, right? And this guy's saying, well, his number one thing is to protect American interests, or he said national security, but American interests, national security, and our freedom. Remember when George Bush said they hate us because of our freedom? Well, freedom really means lifestyle, right? And our lifestyle is tanking. Like, people are going to realize that there's going to be less and less in the grocery stores and, all these things. In war with Russia and China, then there would be, Walmart would be empty practically. And so there just wouldn't be, Amazon, all these things that you can now order would disappear. There'd be just less of stuff, like less in terms of our lifestyle. And that's what this is about because, them invading the Ukraine isn't a threat to us, right? And they could invade all of Europe. And the reality is, there'd be some strategic issues and maybe some economic issues, but it really wouldn't affect America, right? This isn't a threat to America. It isn't like what they did with Cuba, or if they were invading Canada, there'd be something different, right? But we said that we have missiles in the Ukraine. We have, surface-to-air missiles. We have, military capabilities in that whole area, and they don't have anything around us, right? And so it's more of a threat to them than it is to us. And Americans just aren't buying into it. But economically, it's almost a must for them to do something like this, America to do something like this to save the economy. But this will be like the one war that breaks America instead of, in the past, wars have always made America better economically. And this isn't going to happen. Like, this isn't going to save the American economy. And the people just aren't into it, right? So this would be the end of America as we know it.
And this is all about everybody that's, I think the consensus of you now that's assembling, maybe a little bit late around what's going on, is about protecting U.S. national security interests. It's about making sure that this geopolitical catastrophe that looks like it's about to unfold does not further harm U.S. interests, does not further undermine U.S. standing, does not further undermine the Western democratic order.
Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge.
Democratic order.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
Democratic order.
When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order. It is a big idea, a new world order. Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
Democratic order that's been constructed and resulted in U.S. prosperity since World War II. It's intended to avoid dragging in the U.S. into another European conflict like it was in twice into 2 world wars. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about taking the appropriate steps to secure the U.S. interests, to prevent something that could end up becoming much, much bigger. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about committing U.S. Troops to combat in Ukraine.
So what he's talking about there, obviously, is World War III and another European conflict with, I guess, Russia would be the issue here instead of Germany. And him basically saying that, Europe and America are democracies and Russia is a dictatorship. But when your citizenry, your citizens don't want to fight a war and you make them do all kinds of things like being made now, right? All the mandates and things that were mandatory, the way that they handle COVID. And, you can't call this a democracy anymore. Questions of election integrity on both sides. And so America's fallen apart domestically. And when you fall apart domestically, you can't put up much of a fight internationally. And so this is, like I said before, America is, the empire is ending. And, I want to talk about nuclear weapons because I got a lot of comments from people saying, have you researched all this stuff about, there is obviously a truther thread out there about how nuclear weapons aren't real. The same thing about COVID, the flubies, right? The nukies. And so there's now the nukies, the flubies, the populationies, and the cubies, right? All these, And there's these various threads out there. And I know how all these things go because I've seen them come and go, these various theories that have been floated. And some of them have merit and some of them don't. Some of them make sense and some of them don't. And I'm as sure as I possibly can be that we have nuclear power, the capability of nuclear weapons, and we have nuclear power plants, right? Like you saying that what happened in Chernobyl was a hoax, right? The nuclear power plant and these nuclear bombs that went off in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These things you can see the devastation. Are you saying that those pictures of these people, I just don't want to get into it. I know people say they're fire bombs, but, come on, right? Like there's just a point where people in the truth community are just denying everything, even things that are, the things that exist. Again, the whole thing's an illusion. I've talked about that before. Material life, three-dimensional life. It's an illusion of our true, unadulterated nature as a soul. But in terms of questioning everything because the government lies and the media lies, and so just taking an oppositional position and just saying it has to be the opposite of what they're saying. Oh, if they say we have nuclear powers, then we don't, right? If they say we have nuclear bombs, then we don't, right? That's, it's not that binary. And the other thing is that people put too much emphasis on being right and on prophecies, being prophetic, right? Having the ability to see the future or know what's going to happen. And, I got the inside scoop, because I've predicted so many things. There's a lot of my privatized videos that, I just said this is going to happen, or, I just saw the pattern developing, whatever it might be. Some of it came through my spiritual connection, and some of it's pattern recognition. Some of it has to do with, heartfulness teachings and prophecies, and, just a mix of all these things, be able to read people and situations. It's made almost no difference in my life. Well, I shouldn't say that because, the way that I live and, my family and at least my wife and I live in terms of what we're preparing for in the future, yeah, those things are changed, right? But even in my own personal life, right, with my family and, things to do with the Heartfulness organization, things that affect me, relationships that I have, and I can see things going in a certain way, and no matter what I do, couldn't stop it from happening. And I've seen this even on the master level in the Heartfulness system. People who have, the masters of the Heartfulness system have all of their spiritual points and all of these things charged, and, they can't stop things from going in a direction, the worst possible outcome, and the decision making of other people. I mean, for you Christians, think about Jesus, right? He was completely bummed at the end of his life because his disciples sucked. Like even the best disciples, Peter, who was, the rock in which I will build my church, he denied him. Thomas doubted him, and Judas betrayed him, but it was more probably just a lot of their personal decisions, and you really can't influence people like you think, right? It happens to every great spiritual person, and, they just end up submitting to the will of God and accepting what is, right? But they're disappointed in their, even more so than their enemies, their friends, right? Their followers. I have a master's degree in counseling, and if you could just tell people, this is what you need to fix, this is your problem, this is how you do it, this is going to plague you the rest of your life, it's a pattern that you have, they won't listen to you. I mean, they might be coming in desperation. Look at all the alcoholics, look at all the people who are just wrecking their lives, making the same mistakes over and over again. I mean, it's just cyclical, and it's, there's just a powerlessness there, even if you can see it and you can communicate it to other people. But sometimes you can see it in your own life, in your own personal situation. You can't stop what's about to happen, right? And so these things are going to happen. America's going to collapse in one way or another. And in terms of, the heartfulness meditation and the prophecies, let me see if I can find that one prophecy here. It has to do with nuclear power. And so in the Whispers prophecy, I found the one here. In the Whispers, there's a lot of predictions. This is, again, if you're not familiar with this, there was this French woman who was intercommuning with Babaji, the second master of the system. And he died in 1983. And she started receiving messages from him in 1993, I think. So he died, in 83, and 10 years later, she was receiving messages from him. And he was always receiving messages from his spiritual master, Lalaji, and then all these higher developed souls. He intercommuned with Buddha and Jesus and Krishna and Swami Vivekananda and, some of these people who are famous, but then other divine souls that aren't famous or known on earth, but they are in charge of various aspects of the spiritual evolution of this planet, right? And so this has always been, intercommuning is a big part of any spiritual movement. Jesus intercommuned with all of his disciples, and he intercommuned also when he was in physical life, spiritually. And so that's where a lot of this information comes from, with higher developed souls. Souls in one way or another are connected to God, and God uses you as a conduit for this information to come through you, to flow through you, right? And that's what happens to some extent with me here, right? I have my own research I do and things like that, but also, there is this flow, this connection with God, and this free flow of information. And so here is the message. This is from Babaji, the second master of the Heartfulness System, Friday, December 29th, 2000, 8 a.m. Nuclear power will ruin the world. This badly controlled power is demonic. One day man will be overwhelmed by its power. Upheavals that will change the world will have their origin in it. It has much wider implications than you could imagine, which contribute to destabilizing the balance of this planet. In this matter also man plays with fire without actually being aware of the detrimental consequences for humanity. A natural energy will replace all that is currently used and which are harmful to man. Human knowledge does not allow its use for the time being. These secrets will be revealed to men of goodwill who will look into inspired scientific research. That energy will be non-polluting and not very expensive. Those with money power will not be content with it. Only the absolute necessity for survival of the world will prevail. This time is not going to happen tomorrow. Earth will go through great changes before getting into that. These prophecies do not concern you. You are undergoing the damaging effects of this insidious pollution, which will lead the world to collapsing. But you can neither stop time nor modify the system in place. Then protect yourself as well as possible from these harmful effects and pray for your brothers of the future, Babaji. You know, I've been doing the heartfulness meditation for years, and the transmission and the services offered, the transmission, this divine energy, the utilization of divine energy for the transformation of man, which is God's love, which is given in these, meditations, and then the cleaning process that I've undergone, and, my own spiritual internal evolution as a practitioner of the system has proven to me over and over again the validity of the system, right? But for you guys, it doesn't mean anything. You don't even Babaji is somebody I sometimes talk about, right? The masters of the system, the teachings and things. I mean, one way or another, I always, am infusing some of these teachings into my videos, right? But for you, it's, it's whatever it is, right? Some of you guys have tried heartfulness. Some of you guys believe it or not. It doesn't really matter. Whether you're a Christian, you believe in the revelation prophecies, or, you do some other religion and there's prophecies in there, whatever it might be, end of world stuff, end times, there's always these things. And so whether you know about it or not, there's no stopping it. Babaji talks about two things specifically: electromagnetic pollution, which, lots of people believe in 5G but don't believe in nuclear power, right? You can always poke holes in the official stories and find conspiracies, whether they're there or not. Whatever it is, real or imagined. It's just an illusion and a world full of lies. And yet things happen that are out of everybody's control, including people in power, right? All these people who are in power, they would live forever if they could, right? And they can't. And so everybody suffers from things that are out of your control. We all have that. There are things that are out of our control. And this war could be one of them. Like, this might be the beginning of it. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, or, might be some minimal conflict in the beginning. But at some point, there's going to be a war. There's going to be World War III. And there's going to be nuclear weapons used. In the history of any sort of weapon or machine or gadget, it always gets used, right? They didn't make nuclear bombs not to use them. And one day people will see this and see the effects of it one way or another, because, if something is created, then it's going to have a purpose. It's not going to sit there. Eventually it's going to be used, especially with things like weapons. And so there is going to be nuclear war at some point. And I don't think it's that far off, right? I would say, within the next, 10 to 20 years, we'll see it, right? Could be 5 years from now, could be longer. But when it happens, it's going to change everything. And Babaji talks about these upheavals, these tumultuous type of events that are going to happen, that are going to disrupt everything on planet Earth. And it's going to be, apocalyptic, right? And if that's true, I think it's true. You know whatever you know, right? Whatever you think you know, like whatever I think I know. But one thing we all know, that inevitably every one of us is going to die. And no matter what we're doing here on planet Earth that's important to us now, when you die, or you're in the dying process, most of these materialistic things, relationship issues, things that bother you, problems that you have, become, meaningless, right? They lose all any kind of a charge, and you don't care about them anymore. And that's the one thing, knowing that this is, whatever's going on now, is the end of civilization as we now know it, right? At least in terms of, America and Americans and everything that we've ever known, and that no longer being the case, right? America as we know it no longer being America. And that's going to happen probably in our lifetime, and we're seeing it happen now. the beginning of it. It might take 20 years, might take 50 years, I don't know. But empires fall, and right now ours is on the ropes, right? And when it does fall, it's going to affect us in ways that we can't even comprehend, and all the things that we're concerned about now aren't going to mean anything because we're going to have bigger problems, right? There's a prophecy where Babaji says that, the tectonic plates and all this stuff is going to shift, and so the world maps will need revising because the continents and the way the world looks now isn't going to be the way it looks in the future, and that happens all the time. There was a point in history where all the continents, as we now know them, were one massive land mass and everything else was water, right? But those continents broke up, and now we have land masses all over the globe, and I know some of you are going to have the temptation to say it's flat, and please don't, right? We know how you feel. I mean, it's just whatever. But the world, the way it was, in terms of the continents, has changed over and over again. And according to Babaji, it's going to change again. And like I said, I've seen things. I'm like, this is how it's going to play out, and bad things that are going to happen, and just nothing I could do to stop it, right? Sometimes you can change things a little bit, but the only thing you can really do is change your internal life and, realize that your spiritual journey and your soul's purpose and path here is more important than, all your materialistic problems. And I think that's, focusing on connecting to God and changing yourself and becoming a better person, in terms of your divine character development and moving forward on your spiritual journey, because it's just a shit show down here, especially now, but it's like that always. And that all these things that you're trying to do, of course, you do your work, and if you can affect and change things on planet Earth, then you do so. You make the world a better place, sure. But some things you can't stop. They're just going to happen. They're part of the script, the program. They're out of your control. No matter how high you get spiritually, no matter how close you are to God, they're just God's will, and you have to endure those things if they're bad or they're hard, and accept them. They're being for your overall good and the good of the planet. Even though they're unpleasant for us, they're part of God's plan. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely pointing from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.